Equinox. The autumn equinox is my favorite checkpoint on the wheel of the year, and if you've actually been following this channel for many years, you probably saw an extremely younger and very awkward Afura making videos about the seasonal checkpoints from a long time ago. I was like really awkward on camera and was literally reading off of a script that was a printed piece of paper taped to my tripod. So needless to say, it was pretty bad, but I applaud myself for doing that anyway, because I used to really not be good at public speaking. But anyway, guys, here we are. I'm all decked out. I'm really excited, and this is basically going to be not a super basic video on the autumn equinox. I am going to go over the basics of it just in case you're brand new, but for the most part, we're actually going to be looking at the way that I like to use this checkpoint on the wheel of the year for self-development and manifesting and freaking magic, you know? One of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the Wheel of the Year is because when I first got started on my witchy path, the only thing you could really find on the internet or in books about the Wheel of the Year was just kind of like basic regurgitated, like Wiccan book 101 90s style, just like, this is what this means, and these are the gods and goddesses, and these are the herbs and crystals that you should use, and here's a recipe for bread. And there's nothing wrong with that stuff, obviously. It's good to, know where this tradition comes from. It is something that we credit to the Wiccan religion, and the Wiccan religion likes to say that it's a callback to things that were done thousands of years ago. It's up for debate how accurate that is, but I think what's really important in today's day and age, now that the baby witches from the 90s and early 2000s have grown up and actually been applying this wisdom in their own lives in real tangible ways, I think what's really important is for us to come forward and actually share, like, the juicy stuff, like what it actually means to use these energies to manifest a real life, not just talking about recipes and crystals, but literally, like, what does this energy have to do with your ability to develop as a human being and become the person that you are meant to be. So we're going to be diving really deep, and without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the basics. So first things first, if you're brand spanking new to all of this, what even is the Wheel of the Year? The Wheel of the Year is basically just the circular calendar that you get when you look at the winter solstice, the autumn equinox, the summer solstice, and the spring equinox. So when you look at them in order and you put them as a cross, so we'll say it's the winter solstice at the top, the spring equinox next to it down here, and the summer solstice down here, and the fall equinox over here, it starts to look like a clock face, but like all you're looking at is, like, what is it, 12, and I don't know what a clock looks like because I don't use that kind of clock, but you know what I'm talking about. It's like those 4 points on the clock that kind of break it up into quarters. But there's actually 8 checkpoints on the Wheel of the Year instead of just 4, and that is simply because we like to break those sections in half. So we also look at what are called cross-quarter days, and basically a cross-quarter is simply the middle point between a solstice and its nearest equinox. So for example, what we like to think of as Halloween, which I like to call November's Eve, that's actually a cross quarter. It's a cross quarter between the autumn equinox and the winter solstice, but we will of course save that for another video. The autumn equinox is obviously an equinox. So what is an equinox? The scientific term of an equinox is simply, it means equal night, so equal day and equal night. So it's that time of the year where the days have been growing shorter ever since the summer solstice, actually, but by the time you get to the autumn equinox, you're to the point where the hours of nighttime are actually starting to overtake the hours of daytime. So, the days leading up to the autumn equinox, the days are still longer than the nights. But once the autumn equinox happens, on that day, the hours of daylight and darkness are equal, and then after that the nights start to really close in and you have more hours of darkness than you have light. So for that reason, because it's equinox, equal night, we like to think of this as a time that represents balance, and we'll be getting into that in just a little bit. What is the significance of the autumn equinox for witches? Specifically, if you're looking at the Wiccan tradition, the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, which is what most modern witches go off of, even if you're not actually Wiccan and you're not necessarily celebrating it the same ways that a Wiccan would, we do credit Wiccans with kind of creating this structure, not the structure of the circle itself, because obviously that's just nature. That's what nature does. People for billions of years have been working with the Wheel of the Year because that's just what we do. But the reason why we accredit so much of the traditions of the Wheel of the Year on Wiccanism, is Wiccanism a word? It is because they are credited with kind of planning out what these festivals had to do with in ancient pagan culture in Europe. So, and this is kind of a speculation because at the end of the day, we do have some documents, but they're all it's speculation. We don't fully know what ancient peoples were actually doing because we weren't there, and accurate records were not really kept. However, that being said, it is inferred that the autumn equinox was the second of 3 harvests in ancient Celtic culture. So August 1st, which is the checkpoint between the summer solstice and the autumn equinox, is considered the first harvest. Autumn equinox is considered the second harvest, and then November's Eve, which again we look at nowadays as Halloween, is considered the third and final harvest. And the significance of that is that, well, fall is harvest season in general. It's the time when, if you're literally looking at nature, nature has been building up until that point, and then it kind of reaches a tipping point where it's as abundant as it's going to get for the year, and then it all kind of starts to fall apart. It all starts to kind of crumble and decay. But where we're at with the autumn equinox, we're not really paying as much attention to the concept of decay as we would at November's Eve, because obviously that one represents like death, like that's the end of the harvest season. That's the end of, the sort of abundant part of nature for the year. The autumn equinox is kind of that middle point, though. We're not celebrating the very beginning of things coming into fruition anymore, but we're also not quite at the end. We're kind of in this place where it's actually just the perfect amount of abundance. Essentially, if we're looking at nature, the reason why it's considered the second harvest and it's the most abundant one is because that's when like the bulky, hardy food crops would actually be harvested. The first harvest is kind of just like berries and a couple little vegetables and stuff like that. And the end of the season is when you're kind of just clearing out the garden, clearing out the farm, getting rid of, the debris that's left over. But autumn equinox is when like the apples and corn and squashes and like the really heavy hardy stuff that's actually going to last through the winter, that would be when that was brought in agricultural times. So it became a time of year that was associated with the good part of harvesting, the good part, the celebratory part, the hardy part of manifesting, basically. So obviously in this video, we're assuming that most people watching this probably are not ancient Celtic pagans who are, planting things. Hopefully you have some kind of a garden, because that's a deeply spiritual practice. But at the end of the day, the whole point of me making this video is to bring all of this stuff up to date on a spiritual and psychological level, so that you can use the natural energy of the season to actually be doing real stuff. So that being said, what is the significance of harvest season for, a spiritual person nowadays? Manifesting. Obviously, we can manifest in cycles and smaller versions of the cycle over the course of the whole year, but this is the time of year when witchy folks really, really hone in on the concept of harvesting your goals. So you're harvesting the, metaphorical fruits of your labor. You are counting your blessings. You are tallying up everything that you have learned, gained, experienced, evolved through over the course of the year, and giving yourself credit for that. This is a really, really, really important time in the manifesting process, because Just the same way that the wheel of the year works is the same way that manifesting anything works. Plant, tend, harvest, release. Plant, tend, harvest, release. It's the same cycle that the moon follows. It's the same cycle that like the menstrual cycle or the reproductive cycle follows. And it's also just the way you manifest anything. That it's basically the cycle of the universe that we live in. So working with the wheel of the year is really, really powerful because you're able to look at it literally through the process of like imagining that you're a plant or imagining that you are a garden. So basically you're asking yourself like, what did I grow this year? What did I tend to this year? What projects came to fruition for me this year? What worked? What didn't work? How would I plan things better next time? One of the themes of the autumn equinox is preparation. Because again, imagining that you are looking at it as, you know, you're a person that lives outdoors, this is a time of year where, yes, you're celebrating everything and you're still probably enjoying the weather and, you know, everything is very abundant right now, but you have to make sure that the fruits of your labor that you're harvesting right now are going to be able to be preserved or saved in whatever is the most efficient way that's going to get you through the rest of the winter. So obviously, since you're not probably growing all of your own food in real life, you want to look at that in a metaphoric sense of your own development. So maybe you want to take a look back at even just the summer, maybe even just since the spring equinox for that 6 months. What did you learn? What did you gain in your life, whether it be material gains or emotional gains or mental gains, or, you know, maybe you've developed skills or friends or a new job, like whatever it is. This is that time to really count your blessings. In fact, the autumn equinox is thought of as the witch's Thanksgiving. Literally. And you don't even have to call it the witch's Thanksgiving. I honestly think that it was always considered Thanksgiving in even like the Native American cultures and probably just all over the world, just because if you look at nature, it makes a lot more sense for it to be happening at this time versus like late November. After like in late November when Americans celebrate the quote unquote Thanksgiving holiday, like that's way after harvest season has actually already happened. And actually there is historical evidence that the first Thanksgiving, the first American Thanksgiving, was actually celebrated much closer to the autumn equinox, but in like the turn of the century, like the last turn of the century, the date was actually changed by the American government in order to support like the commerce of Christmas, which was becoming a commercial holiday. So just a little random tidbit for you there, but going back to the concept of it being Thanksgiving, like not only are you literally celebrating the abundance of nature and, you know, physical manifestations, but you're also doing the same thing on a spiritual level. If you have studied manifestation or law of attraction or anything like that, you probably know that everyone says attitude of gratitude, attitude of gratitude, attitude of gratitude. Gratitude is the most powerful force in the manifesting process because there's a few different reasons for it. For one, if you're looking at it in like a woo-woo magical kind of way, it's believed that by actually being in the vibration of gratitude, you naturally attract more things to be grateful for on an energetic level. But that being said, if you want to even just look at it in more of a tangible sense, if you already have a lot of abundance in your life, but you're so stressed out about something, or you're thinking too hard about what you don't have yet, or you're working too hard towards something that you think you want, you're not even going to be literally fully receiving the things that are already yours. You know, think about how many times you were busy focusing on something and didn't realize that something that would make you just as happy was already right under your nose. You had already manifested it, but you weren't receiving it because you weren't allowing yourself to receive it. Having a gratitude practice is the way to start receiving. You will receive the things that are literally already yours, and then you will also receive new things as a result of that. So for me, this time of year is the perfect time to really get serious about your gratitude practice. If you don't have some kind of gratitude practice that you're doing daily or at least weekly, now is the time to get into it and, you know, set the intention that you're going to stick to it throughout the rest of the year. It's very, very simple. Like literally what I do every single weekday morning, because sometimes I get lazy on the weekends or my schedule is random, but every single weekday morning I write down down 3 things that I'm thankful for and why. And the and why part is super important because it's by explaining to yourself why you're grateful for it that you actually have triggered an emotional response within yourself, and it's the emotional response of gratitude that actually helps you to manifest, not just like mindlessly listing off things. So instead of being like, I'm grateful for my cat, I'm grateful for my grandma, I'm grateful for the food on my table, like you want to ask yourself why. Like, I'm grateful for my cat because I live alone and it's important for me to be giving and receiving love with another creature, and by loving this creature it helps me to be a more compassionate and fulfilled person. I love my grandma because without the sacrifices that she made I would not be living the abundant lifestyle that I've grown up to be able to live. I am grateful for the food on my table, simply not just because otherwise I'd be hungry, but also because I live in a world where any kind of food that I want I can get it from the grocery store, and I know that that's a huge luxury compared to ancient times or even people in other parts of the world. And that makes me feel like I am blessed or I'm lucky or whatever. Those are just some examples of like the actual kind of soul work that you want to do around your gratitude practice. By even having to put into words why you're grateful for something, you actually learn something about yourself. You learn something about the nature of, the reality that you have manifested. Sometimes you will notice things that you want to change, or you'll notice things that you don't want to change. You'll notice things that you actually just want to amplify. Or maybe you'll figure out what your values are. Maybe you aren't super clear on your values around why you eat the way you do, or why you have cats in your house, or whatever it is. And then when you realize exactly why you have things that way and what parts of it you're grateful for, you can actually start making decisions that will create more things to be grateful for in your life. So for example, something that I experienced recently was one of my cats getting very sick. And instead of just looking at myself as a victim and being like, oh my gosh, this is horrible, I can't believe the universe is doing this to us, especially when I'm having all these other problems right now, da 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 da. Instead of looking at it that way, I try to look at it as counting my blessings and really being grateful that I have even gotten to have this cat. Grateful that my other cats have never had any health problems. Grateful that even though it was an expensive vet trip, that I was able to get to the vet. The fact that the veterinarian even exists in our reality. Because, not everyone has access to a vet, and most people in the past wouldn't have. And then taking that into manifesting forward, by almost losing my cat and realizing how grateful I was for him, I realized that something that I want to do in the next 5 to 10 years is actually have cat philanthropy be a huge part of my life and business, to the point where eventually I want to own my own cat sanctuary. Was I already somewhat aware of that? Yes. But if I hadn't been put in a position to have to count my blessings and realize what things I'm even grateful for and why I'm grateful for them, I wouldn't really have that clear of a vision of this cat sanctuary idea that I want to manifest. I wouldn't appreciate that aspect of this desire that I have for the future. So that's kind of a dramatic example, but the importance of gratitude and importance of actually taking the time to explain to yourself why you're grateful for things is a doorway that opens up just so much more that you can create, and so much more that you can start the process of manifesting over the course of the next year. And then you'll be harvesting even better or even bigger or more conscious or more intentional results the following harvest season. So gratitude is the biggest one. Honestly, if we could just talk about one thing, and if you could just leave from this video with one idea about this part of the year, gratitude would really be it, because gratitude kind of just conquers all. Now, that being said though, I am a gray path witch / middle path witch, so we're not just going to talk about the fluffy bunny stuff of being grateful and writing a gratitude list. The thing about the autumn equinox is that it's also about that balance between light and dark, right? Because we're at the 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of darkness, and the darkness is closing in concept. So even though I tend to think of November's Eve as the one where you're like deep into shadow work, autumn equinox is the time to start dipping your toe in the water of shadow work. Now, I know that I mention the term shadow work all the time on this channel, and it's occurred to me that most people watching this channel probably do have an idea of what shadow work is or are actively using it, but I don't want to be presumptuous and assume that everybody watching this channel knows what shadow work is, or knows well what shadow work is. So I thought over the course of this episode, and then more so in the November's Eve episode, we can touch a bit deeper on shadow work. So first things first, what is shadow work? Essentially, shadow work is the self-development practice of taking a look at the things that aren't bright and shiny and sparkly and fun about life, and seeing what you can learn about it in a way that actually transmutes it into more positive energy, or more useful or fruitful energy for yourself. So the most basic concept of shadow work is basically taking a look at the things that don't make you happy, the things that maybe scare you, or the things that frustrate you, or the things that just are kind of icky to you, and asking yourself, what exactly is it about that bothers me? So it's almost the opposite of a gratitude practice at first. So instead of like looking at all the things you love and being, asking yourself why you love them, shadow work is the practice of actually looking at everything that you don't love and asking yourself why you don't love it. And the ultimate goal is not to make yourself love terrible things. That's not the goal at all. The goal is simply to understand yourself better through that process, and then learn new and inventive ways to actually reclaim your power back from things that were sucking power away from you before. It takes a lot of energy to be angry. It takes a lot of energy to be frustrated. It takes a lot of energy to feel disempowered. It takes a lot of energy to be afraid. It takes a lot of energy to be judging yourself or judging other people harshly all the time. It takes a lot of energy to be feeling like a victim instead of being grateful. So if you can take that energy and transmute it into something that's more useful to you, that's energy that can actually be going towards manifesting the life that you actually want. And honestly, like, this is the bread and butter of what I do for myself and what I've done with my clients and what my students are doing in Alchemy of Affluence Academy. We take these witchy concepts like the Wheel of the Year and the seasonal energies and the moon cycles and spells and rituals and crystals and herbs and all of that kind of stuff, and instead of just doing it just to do it, or doing it, I don't know, why do people do spiritual stuff if there's no actual, alchemical transmutation as the goal? I don't know. Those of us crazy people who are affluence alchemists, we're taking these traditions and these practices, and we're specifically applying them to how we can master ourselves, self-mastery. Understanding ourselves as fully and completely as possible, and using that knowledge to actually make our lives better and make the world a better place through the way that we are transmuting and giving and receiving energy. So shadow work is a huge part of that. Shadow work can be dark and grueling and difficult and painful and horrible. However, once you're in the practice of doing it and it's a natural part of your life and a natural part of your spiritual and self-development practice, you almost don't even feel it anymore. It almost just turns into a natural thing that can either be fun or is neutral, or is just overall extremely beneficial. I could not imagine my life if I didn't actively do shadow work. So this is something I'm really passionate about teaching and sharing. So it is something that you probably already have and will continue to hear me talking about. So if you're somebody who's either new to shadow work, or if you did a shit ton of shadow work in the past and you're sick and tired of it, like I was at one point in my journey, the Autumn Equinox is actually a great time to, again, balance that out. If you haven't been doing any shadow work at all, or you've never tried it, now is the time to start integrating it into your life, maybe in small doses. If you're somebody who's always done shadow work and you just need to refreshen things up, maybe it's a good time to actually start balancing your shadow work practice with more of a light work practice, like the gratitude thing, for example. Or maybe just doing lighter shadow work, there's the shadow work of oh my gosh, remember that really traumatic thing that happened in my childhood and that's why I'm afraid of blah, blah, blah. That's a darker, deeper shadow work that's more November Eve vibes. But Autumn Equinox shadow work could be something as simple as, asking yourself why you got really frustrated with a particular project that you were working on. That goes back to the harvest season concept, because What we're harvesting is the results of what we've been up to for the past year. So say you worked really hard on a project and certain aspects of it ended up yielding an obvious positive harvest, but other aspects of it feel like you put in a lot of effort and ended up kind of just getting bitter about it because you didn't care for all of the results you got. That's shadow work that you could do at this time of year too. You're literally doing a tally up of like what worked and what didn't work in the past season or in the past year, and asking yourself like, why did it work or not work? What is it about the way I was going about it? What is it about the emotions that I was putting into it? What is it about the way I was connecting to myself or connecting with other people? The way that I was handling things that worked and didn't work. Shadow work can just be that simple. And the ultimate goal of shadow work, at least for me and for our affluence alchemists, is really just to transmute fear into love. So anytime that any suffering is happening in any way, it is because someone somewhere is leading with fear instead of with love. And by simply being able to lean into that fear or lean into whatever that negative emotion was that was creating that action, and asking yourself how you can transmute it into being able to lead from a place of love or a place of excitement or a more positive vibration, you actually reclaim your power back from that. You get way better ideas on how to move forward. You attract way better people, places, things, experiences into your life, and then those things that used to hold so much negative power over you actually just become tools of your success story. The whole point of Alchemy of Affluence Academy is to teach people how to recognize within themselves what their biggest perceived weaknesses are and transform them into their greatest strengths. And by dipping your toe into shadow work, or making your shadow work a little bit more chill, if you're like the way I used to be, where you're like way too into it to the point where it was stressful, the autumn equinox is the perfect time to just like ask yourself, like, where am I at with my light work and shadow work? Do I need to be doing more of both? Do I need to be doing more of one and less of the other? Do I need to just be a little bit more chill with both of them and do something as simple as like a gratitude list in the morning or whatever it is? This is the time of year to do that. Another theme of the autumn equinox that we touched upon briefly is the concept of preparation. It's kind of like that Game of Thrones quote, like, winter is coming. And I know for those of us who live in a cold area, that has a lot more like visceral, tangible understanding for us, whereas those of you lucky ducks who are out there living in really comfortable temperate environments, you might not fully understand what I mean by this, but use your imagination. This is a time of year where you're looking at the course of the next several months, which will be turning into winter, and that's just a time when nature isn't quite as abundant. Whether it means that you're going to be covered in a mountain of snow like I am, or whether it simply means that things are just not at the height of their growth cycle, that means that you should be paying attention to that aspect of nature and realizing that nature giveth and nature taketh away. So it's really important to not only just be grateful for where you're at, but also ask yourself, like, how can I make the most of what I've manifested so far? How can I make the most of what I have harvested so far? And allow that to sustain me in a time where the abundance is going to shift a little and things are not necessarily going to be as hospitable in the same area or the same arrangement of elements as they have been thus far in the past season. So whether you live in an environment that actually gets cold or not, the idea is simply to remind yourself that when there's less sunlight, you have less energy. It's just a natural fact of life. Like, I know some people are kind of night owls and they kind of thrive off of moon energy, which is great. I can be like that sometimes too. But generally speaking, over the winter, it's just a time when you're just a little bit more chill. You kind of want to, relax a little bit more. Or maybe you do want to be working or studying, but like you kind of want to be cozy while you're doing it. You don't necessarily want to be pushing in the same way that you would at a time when the universal energy is more high vibe and more energetic. So basically what you want to do during the harvest season is create an environment for yourself or arrange the elements in your life in such a way that you're going to be able to be kind of carried through the energetic lows that might be coming up during the winter season. So what does that mean in a tangible sense? Well, other than, the concept of like, oh, I'm going to gather a bunch of pumpkins so that I have food over the course of the winter. It's going to more, for people like us, it's going to be more like, okay, so maybe I worked really hard through the spring and summer on my business. Or maybe I worked really hard on my shadow work, or maybe I gained a new skill, or whatever it was that you've been working on in the past year. You want to ask yourself, like, what did I learn from that can make the process way easier, way more efficient, way more simple, and it can actually support me so that I can chill out a little bit in the next leg of the journey. So for example, maybe you wrote a whole bunch of blog posts or did a whole bunch of YouTube videos in the past year or in the past season, and now you're going to learn to optimize your SEO and start making Pinterest posts about them, so that naturally those things can just be cycling around and your content can be driving traffic to your website without you necessarily having to create every new blog post from scratch. Maybe you're going to take a little bit of a break from making new content because you know that the content that you've already created can more than sustain you and drive traffic to your business or whatever. Something like that. I know not everybody here is a business person. I know some of you guys are, but in whatever way you need to apply that piece of advice, ask yourself how what you've already manifested or what is currently coming to fruition for you can be put into a can and preserved, kind of like you would make jam out of the fruits of summer, and then that can sustain you so that you can take a break, or maybe not a complete break, but so that the next leg of the journey is just easier. This is also back to school time. So the autumn equinox actually happens right at the very end, like literally the last day of Virgo season. And Virgo season is back to school vibes. September is back to school vibes. So whether you're like literally going to school or literally taking a new class, hint, hint, join Alchemy of Affluence Academy. It's a great time to get into it. But like whether you're actually in school or not, it's a time of like, instead of being like super outgoing and just like being free and willy-nilly and summer-like and just having fun and running around and doing crazy stuff, this is the time when you start turning your gaze inward. Again, we already talked about self-reflection and shadow work and gratitude rituals and stuff like that, but it's also an amazing time to actually learn a new spiritual practice or learn a new subject. Honestly, any topic that you're interested in, now is a great time of year to start learning. It's a great time to start reading more books. It's a time to start taking classes on anything that you might be interested in. It's a good time to amp up your journaling practice. It's a good time to maybe read a new witchcraft book and add some new things into your rituals. It's a good time to create new rituals. I don't know about you, but for me, summertime tends to be a time that's more just like willy-nilly, and even though I do maintain certain rituals consistently over the course of the summer, it's really more about just being free-flowing and letting my intuition be its own guide in the summer. Whereas as autumn starts to move into winter, I need more structure in order to sustain me. Like I need something to occupy me so that I'm not just sitting around going crazy and thinking about myself. I mean, of course I'm doing shadow work and I am thinking about myself, but the winter and the autumn time is just more of an introspective time. And if you haven't done your shadow work and you don't have an active practice that's actually productive for learning to know yourself, you could easily just be spinning your wheels and feeling like a crazy person, or getting bored, or starting to do destructive habits, or sit on the couch and get fat, or you know what I mean? Like you can kind of get back into like addictive patterns and things like that in the autumn and winter, unless you replace those default shitty habits with better habits that are actually going to sustain you and help you to become a better version of yourself. Like human beings need something to do. We need something to be working on. We need something to be learning, or we need something to be growing or building in our lives, something to actively devote our energy towards. Otherwise, we go idle and we start becoming like degenerative. It's just unfortunately an aspect of human nature. And it's so easy to do that nowadays when we do have so many comforts. You know, we're not out farming all of our own food all the time. And actually, in ancient times, a lot of the time there also really wasn't anything to do in the winter either, besides just make sure that you stayed warm enough to live and that your food lasted, because you weren't really farming in the winter either. So the autumn and winter are just naturally a time in the human collective consciousness where we like to return to our studies. We like to, you know, build our brains instead of just working with, you know, our bodies, or, you know, running around, or like whatever it is. We really go more into a cerebral state. So now is an amazing time to cozy up with some books or some lessons, or even if you're not like going out and learning anything, being taught anything by someone else, just like learning about yourself, doing your own journaling or your own rituals or whatever it is. So I guess that's pretty much it. We could really sit around and talk about the autumn equinox and the wheel of the year forever, because it's absolutely a huge, expansive concept, and it is one of my favorite things to talk about. So there will be more of these videos coming up as the seasons progress. But for now, I will let you guys go and enjoy your autumn season. And if you are thinking of any autumn traditions or any autumn rituals, or even themes that we didn't have time to go into in this video, or maybe even ones that I haven't heard of, I would absolutely love for you to post a comment and get a discussion going about how we can get the most out of this time of year as modern witches. So thank you so much for watching. I will catch you for the next video, and until then, blessed be.